a radical thought, and I decided that at the end of all of that Lamar editing, what I would do is I would share that radical thought with you. Because I don't know if you really appreciate how far on the edge how radical, in fact, how outside normal, in fact, my empathetic positioning is. So, empathy, let's just begin with a few words, okay? So, empathy and compassion are not the same thing, okay? There are a lot of people out there in the world who teach empathy, but what they mean is compassion. Both things are acceptable because tolerance is the minimum. There are a lot of people since the 1990s who have been preaching tolerance and toleration. Tolerance and toleration are the minimum. So I was talking yesterday, and I fact checked after I was done with my talking, and I was 100% right. Even if you've never heard anyone say it before, doesn't mean that I'm automatically wrong. Anyway, I was talking yesterday about how our country dramatically changed after the Vietnam War. And something people don't fully understand is that so civilizations. Hey, Rachel, your phone seems to be up, so I'm doing this to get your attention instead. Um, if you want to change a culture, you can't change it from the inside. You have to change it from without. And the only way to radically change a culture is for that culture to be fighting an unkillable enemy. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. We're going to be talking today about cartoon villains. Because a cartoon doesn't have to be Looney Tunes and its logic. Um, Political cartoons are most certainly not Looney Tunes in their logic. Okay, so cartoon is clearly a political art form before it was a children's entertainment art form. Okay. Video games are not dissimilar. Mythology and folklore are not dissimilar. If anyone in the chat knows a Fallout 76 fan, they know that right now the most important thing in the world to the Fallout 76 fan, gamer, the person who exists within the Fallout 76 world, if you have a friend, you know anyone who exists in that world, you know that the most important thing in their world right now is whether or not Bigfoot is real, where you can find it, and whether or not the people who have early access to that information are gonna spoil it for you. This is the same in all art forms, all storytelling media. Everyone is worried that they aren't going to get this same, of course they spoiled. We're not going to get the same authentic experience. Because seeing a performance, seeing a piece of art for the first time is a unique experience because that is the only time you will actually get to see it for the first time. And so, in a video game that relies on keeping your attention by getting you to explore the world and find unique and interesting things that feel like they're there because of a designer who has designed an experience unique to you, talking about God now, these abstractions, they're all the same thing. Okay, they're all the same thing. So now let's talk about how words get smashed into the same thing. And with the word comes the greater ideal, the greater concept that the word, understand, is a cone. So if you imagine a cone, okay, you just imagine an abstracted cone in no space, just exactly like you were taught to do in geometry. A cone that doesn't actually exist, that has a circular opening, and it comes down to a point in 3 dimensions, right? That point is the word, okay? Any word. Let's just say footage, okay? The word footage. It means a particular something. It means actual footness, right? actual lengths of foot of actual film that movies, etc., were shot on, right? And now shot is another word that has one of those cones, and shot is a word that means a lot of different things. In this case, shot is a word that means a lot of things, but in this specific sentence, shot means pointed the camera lens at. They use that word shot because you point a gun at things, right? Okay, I'm explaining how a word has this funnel and that a lot of things can get trapped in a word, right? As they come from the concept down to the very specific word that is used. This is why there's such a thing called technical languages. This is why there are jargons. And this is how there can be terms of art, terms that can't change, that cannot be used outside of their context meaningfully without denigrating the former meaning. Okay? These are big words. Okay, these are big and important words like soul, right? Okay. Empathy and compassion are two of these big words. Okay, they're jargon, they're technical words. These are words for something very specific that cannot change over time to mean lots of things, or the original meaning will be denigrated and lost. And because there's only one word for the concept, the funnel has to be not a funnel, the cone has to be not a cone, but an extremely narrow cylinder, like a drinking straw. But we all know that if you make a drinking straw too narrow, you can't get anything out of it meaningfully. And if it's too wide, it's uncomfortable to suck on. And so this is how information transmission works. Words are cones to concepts, and sometimes you can do that whole Venn diagram thing, where concepts will overlap. And if you think about flowing water, being trapped in these cones, that flowing water is your information transmission. So the information that is caught in the concept, that is included in the cloud of the concept, and this should be an easy concept for you to understand just because you have been engaging in a cloud digital space as far as saving and storing information, important information that you need to access anywhere. It's called the cloud. It's called that because of what clouds do, and I'm using the term cloud because of what a cloud is. If we understand a cloud is just an isolated pocket of closely trapped together moisture, one thing, water, effectively, just water, all trapped and moving together as a body, right, as a distinct thing. And so a concept is very much like a cloud. It's amorphous, it's poorly defined, but it's a clustering together. It's the clumping up the best we can, like taking just raw clay or whatever and clumping it together. All of the things that are in this concept funnel down into words that indicate this concept. Compassion and empathy are two clouds, very small. They're very small and very specific things, okay? And so the wider you make your funnel, your cone, or to capture that concept, the more likely you are to be actually catching things that aren't the concept because it's very small. Think about it like a colander. Okay, if you're trying to wash beans, okay, you're trying to wash beans, and you've got these beans of a particular size. Let's say they're black beans, okay, but you have a colander designed for a larger bean, like a kidney bean or a lima bean, right? So it's got bigger holes. You put your black beans in there, and when they're all a mass, and none of them fall out because they're a clumped together mass of black beans. But then when you start running water through it and shaking it out, what's going to happen? They're just all going to fall out of the kidney bean holes. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about catching concepts, when I'm talking about information transmission, lines of information transmission, or in this case, you're cutting a hole out, and you're effectively fishing, right? You're effectively funnel fishing, or trying to trap ideas into words. So basically what you're doing, channeling them down from the concept into the word, and then you're presenting the word, and you're hoping that the same channel, because you've effectively chosen a word, you've chosen an effective word, is going to effectively transmit the information that you were attempting to transmit to your receiver. Okay, but we also understand this, because we've existed in a world where someone who understood these concepts intimately, someone who had thought about them long enough to go insane, built things with them. Okay, so we live 100 years downstream of Nikola Tesla. We live so far downstream that his name, divorced from his estate, because he didn't leave an estate, can be used as a marketable product and a brand, a recognizable brand. That's how far downstream from Nikola Tesla and his genius we are. We don't owe him anything but a good memory. We don't owe him anything but accurately transmitting the information that is his concept. You understand? He has become a concept now because he's dead. What happens to you after you die? You become information. Okay? What is the afterlife? The afterlife is a process of going from being a real thing to being a cloud of things to being just a single thing. You go from being a cloud into the pressure of being the single thing. And that single thing and that cloud, all of that is divorced from you. You have no control over any of that. The best you can do is live a life that will encourage people to remember you well. And that remembering you well may lead to the who you really were being compressed into an idea, a concept that people accurately convey in conversation. But we all know that that's a process that's dicey after 1,000 years, because it hasn't even been 1,000 years. It's been 500 years, and Christopher Columbus went from a culture hero to a culture villain in a very, very, very short amount of time, in fact. And it happened because how we were remembering him wasn't true to who he knew himself to be. Okay, so now let's pivot to what compassion and empathy really are, because compassion and empathy are different things. And if you're doing the one but you think you're doing the other, or you're trying to do the one, you're trying to do either of them, and you're basically all you're doing is tolerance, and you're not doing it very well, then you're being harmful to yourself, and you're being harmful to the people around you. Harmful. Harm in English is the word that we use now, but the word that we used to use was evil. Evil means any kind of harm, intentional or otherwise. That's evil to me. It can be accidental harm, just harm that is. So trees could be evil to us. Rivers could be evil to us. This is why kings and some of these stories, some of these folklore stories that have arrived to us from kings, we translate how we translate them, but they didn't necessarily have to mean how we translate them, you understand, because of information transmission. So, for example, when Caligula goes and he takes his army, Caligula, the Roman emperor, takes his army to the English Channel, and he looks at the landmass of Britain in the distance, and he's got his army there, and then he doesn't cross, and he tells his army to beat, to chastise and curse the channel. That was a viable way of dealing with the evil of the British people, the harm that they could cause Roman civilization. Chastising the channel was meant to be a sort of preemptive measure. It was a sort of preemptive measure toward having the gods of the channel, which could be dead human beings, still conscious and alive because of the circumstances that make ghosts, and those circumstances also make entities of greater or lesser power to have evil, harmful effects on humans. And so what you would do, the thinking back then, of course we don't think like this now, but that doesn't mean that it didn't have a positive effect back then. What you would do back then is you would chastise the channel preemptively. And then the channel, the gods of the channel, the ghosts, the mermaids, the spirits, the monsters, would then, what they would then do is they would prevent the people on the British Islands, the Irish and the Proto-Welsh, all of these people, they would then not be able to cross the channel to bother Rome. But here's a part of that story, if you want to understand cones and concepts and information transmission and proper interpretations and all of this. Proper interpretation is the moral of the story. If you want to understand something about that story that you've never heard before, you have been told that story that the people, the Cymry, for example, or the Brythons, that these people were backwater, pagan, stupid, primitive, poor, uncivilized, barbarian non-Romans. What you haven't been taught, and this is because the archaeology is still very new and it hasn't proliferated out into documentaries that affect young people enough that they talk to their friends, and things like the British invasion stop being, or the Anglo-Saxon invasion. The British invasion was the music. The Anglo-Saxon invasion wasn't actually an invasion. It wasn't even a population erasure. It was just a population migration that was misunderstood because the people who remained there were literate, and several hundred years later wanted to negatively propagandize the people who had moved in. This is, again, information transmission, concepts that are caught in too big or too narrow funnels. You can think of the funnel I'm talking about like a spotlight. We could do it in the reverse of the cave. You're in the cave and you're shining a light out into the darkness outside the cave. You can do it any way you want. You're standing outside a cave and you're looking into the cave trying to see what the hell is down there. It's all the same. You can think about it any way you want. Optics, light, and the way that we see and water behave the same, so long as you're talking about geometrical shapes. When you're talking about non-natural shapes, then light starts to act wacky. Even our best light generating or rendering models, for example, Unreal Engine 4 or 5, whatever the one we're doing now, it seems to think that light has this property of bouncing and not losing radiance. So like in 7 Days to Die, for example, you can manipulate digging underground so that sunlight that is nowhere near you is bouncing off the walls of the inside of your cave, and you've got miles of sunlit cave. We all know that this is not how light actually works. That sure, light bounces, but it's not radiant on the bounce into a dark cave. Okay, none of it is actually propaganda. Anyway, where was I? I got myself distracted thinking about other ways that we could talk about what I'm talking about. We could talk about, I'm using the same setup as Plato's Cave because I arrived at the setup for Plato's Cave before I read Plato. So I'm fluent in this thought experiment because I arrived at it independently. So empathy versus compassion versus tolerance. Tolerance is what you have for any kind of chemical that's outside your body, right? So we have tolerance for alcohol. I have a tolerance for THC, right? Tolerance is what we have for human beings who aren't us. We tolerate them, right? We don't do things like threaten them with violence when we disagree with them. That's not tolerance. Okay? Compassion and empathy are not tolerance. Jesus encouraged us to empathize with everyone, right? He says, love your neighbor, right? He says, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Well, what word was he using? Because in the English, love means a lot of things. It's a very wide net, right? It's a wide cone. You can say I love a band that you don't even listen to, and people will understand that you mean that you love that it exists for other people to have and for you to occasionally engage with. That's not love, right? Like, we know that. So the word that Jesus used was not a Greek word, but the Greek word that, okay, really quickly, if we're going to talk about Jesus, we have to understand something really quickly. The Gospels were written a long time after Jesus died, like 60 years, maybe 30 years after he died. That's a pretty long time. Paul wrote before the Gospels. Paul does not quote Jesus. So Jesus' sayings, as are captured in the Gospel, are pure inventions of the authors of the Gospels. Nobody knew Jesus's idiom. Nobody was repeating Jesus's maxim, because that's not how Semitic people work, especially in the first century AD and BC, that 200-year span that led to Jesus and then resulted in the Gospels. You take 200 years of history and you just see how those people behaved. The Semitic peoples, Semitic speaking peoples, people who spoke Hebrew and specifically Aramaic, these people weren't memorizing holy people's idiom and writing them down and like we do. That's an Indo-European thing. Greek is an Indo-European language, and there was an argument, a cultural argument, for about 300 years after the Semitic peoples were included in the Greek diaspora. Anyway, for about 200 years, they were arguing about the fact that the Semitic folklore is fucking boring because none of their heroes speaks. And we know now that the Septuagint did change the Hebrew canon by adding speeches from people like Moses, so that Greek cultural engaging Jewish believers had then modern scriptural motifs. Okay. So Jesus wasn't speaking Greek. And Jesus wasn't remembered in Aramaic. His words were not remembered. There's no gospel cue to find. It doesn't exist. Nobody sat down while he was talking and treated him like Socrates. No one treated him like Aristotle. Jesus was not a teacher in the Greek sense. No one wrote down anything that the Buddha said either, by the way. All of these quotes that we have from most of these historical people are made up oftentimes hundreds years later, competing with the Greek tradition, because the Greek tradition had been making up dialogues from famous historical people for hundreds of years by Jesus. This is what Homer is. Homer's putting words in the mouths of people who can't even speak, gods and concepts. He's having animals speak. He has the spirits of the dead speak. His characters speak to his audience. The Semitic tradition doesn't do that. Moses isn't speaking to the audience. The audience is trained priests. The writing is mostly just the writing, if there is any dialogue, especially if anyone speaks, but it's usually God who's speaking. It's not maxims, it's commandments, and commandments just mean words, but it's not words that are like meant to be memorized for academic arguments. It's words that are supposed to be memorized for action. Okay. Compassion and empathy aren't words like that, because Jesus isn't that God. And so the things that Jesus suggested that we do, like love, compassion, empathy, these things, they're not that God telling you to live that way. They're a guy like me telling you that there is a better way to live than the way that God's words make you live, or else you die, or you get kicked out of civilization. He says that there is a higher calling than the bare minimum of what will get you thrown in prison, or what won't get you invited to dinner, or what will get you treated like a leper. He says there's a higher abstraction, and that God has a special place set aside for people who approach that abstraction. because at the time that he's speaking, Greek and Semitic speaking people understood that Homer had already set aside multiple places in the Greek afterlife for people who live specific kinds of lives. If you committed your life to religion, binding, if you committed your life, if you bound your life, if you were religious in life to a particular concept, a God or a way of life or a future, if you committed yourself to building a future for Greece as a person living in the Greek diaspora, you were considered Greek and you got to go to a Greek afterlife. The Greek afterlives are pretty sweet for people who were bound to the Greek way of life, because the Greek way of life was pretty fucking sweet. The Greek way of life in the Greek afterlife was so bomb-ass that the Romans converted. They conquered them and converted to their faith system. That's a pretty compelling faith system. And so if you're a Hebrew or a Semitic speaking, if you're a Hebrew reading, Aramaic speaking person, that's threatening. Because new afterlives, novel afterlives to a diasporic people, new afterlives also mean that you're not going to be hanging out with your ancestors in death. So if you've got parents, if you're alive and you've got dead parents who are in a Hebrew afterlife and you're considering going to the Greek afterlife, you're never going to see your parents again. That's a big deal to a lot of people today. A lot of people today are very concerned with going to the same afterlife as their parents and their grandparents and their cousins and their sisters and their brothers and all the people that they loved in life. What is that love? That love is what Jesus was saying to extend to every single human being. That particular love, the wanting to go to the same place that they went when you die. And do we do that? I'm going to get mad right now, because do we do that? No, we damn people to hell all the time. Go to hell all the time. All the time we encourage people to go to a lesser afterlife than the one that we believe we're going to. But we don't behave when we tell people to do that as though we're actually going to go there. We behave as though we're going to meet them in hell. I will see you in hell, because I know my choices are bringing me there, and I'm going to make sure by my choices that your ass joins me in death. That's how we actually live. The names that I can see on my screen right now are all people trying to take me to hell right now, especially this composite guy. Compassion is a Latin word. Empathy is a Greek word. And they might seem like they're the same word, because empathy means inside feeling, basically. Inside feeling. Compassion basically means with feelingness, or with feelingization. You can drop that is for the ION, right? Passion and pathos are almost the same word. Almost the same word, because they're both a kind of feeling. But your passion explains what you're doing when you're in the grip of it. Your passion is a god. It's an abstracted, intelligent agency that's neither you nor God nor any other living human being. Your passion is. Your pathos is why you did what you did. It's your deeper reasoning, your deeper reason. Okay? When we seek pathos in a character, when as a writer we give a character pathos, what we've done is we've given them an emotional landscape where their decisions make sense as reactions to their emotions. Passion is a god that controls you, and pathy is an emotional landscape that explains why you do what you do without words. These are entirely different things. So if you have empathy, what you've done is inside your brain, you have built a four-dimensional model of another person's emotional landscape that gives you the ability to understand why they're making their decisions without asking them why. Because asking them why is recommending that they apologize for their behavior, which means that they need to start at building pathy. pathos. They need to begin at building pathos. This is my emotional landscape. Compassion means putting yourself in their emotional landscape, sharing their emotional landscape, and experiencing their decision-making apparatus. Those are different things. Having compassion for someone means to remember that you have been in their emotional shoes before and let them be. Having empathy for someone means not killing them for making a mistake. These are radically different things. Radically different things. Empathy effectively means not damning someone for not being you. Compassion is a kind of meditation. These are different things. Empathy falls much closer to things like concepts like mercy and forgiveness than it does like tolerance and trying to understand where someone is coming from. Okay. Now, we actually pivot to what I'm here for. A radical empathetic position. Because what I'm not going to ask you to do is imagine that you were them and what you would do in their position, because it's easy to have compassion for people. It's easy to believe that we're accurately compassionate. It's also very easy to believe that we're accurately empathetic. And if I haven't split this hair, if I haven't accurately or adequately split this hair, we can quibble about it, because the ideas are very, very, very close together and easy to get backward. And if I said my words backward, that's an evidence, that's a proof. The error proves the rule. I hope you guys understand that the reason I just push past my errors is because it proves what I was trying to say. If you can identify that, well, that was an error, then you can identify the truth and we don't have to talk about it. Okay, so a radical empathetic with the cartoon villains of our era. I see a lot of people who sit down and they try to make these shorts and they try to make these YouTube videos where they try to explain to you why the world is the way the world is, and they talk about rich people like they rule the world. They talk about our rulers. They talk about the ruling class, or they talk about political and cultural elites like they're a monoclass, like they're like they're a monolith, like they're one being, like they're one group that works together. And it's like even what I was telling you about the Federal Reserve is that the reason that those people work together is to the goal of keeping the United States solvent, not because there's not more money to be gained screwing one another over in a free and open market. When you've got money, you've got the ability to buy weapons. And if you've got enough money, you got the ability to buy people who will die in front of die behind those weapons. And so if we don't really know the history of how feuds worked, like we call the feudal system because it was a system of fighting feuds like I don't know their names, the McCoys and the whatever, right? Is it the Hatsfields and the McCoys? Is that it? Feuds. Okay, so feuds. Money can buy wars, so that the people fighting the wars have no connection to the people that want the wars fought. Right, so like England fighting France doesn't have anything to do with the languages, it doesn't have anything to do with the culture, it doesn't have anything to do with the natural resources, it has everything to do with the French crown believes that it should be also in control of the English crown. And so England's like, well, no, I'm in control of the English crown, whatever king is sitting on the English throne at the time. And then the French king is like, well, you're not going to be for long because I can pay these people to take it from you. And that's just how that goes. Oh, my video is busted for some reason. Oh, because my phone is about to die. I forgot that. Okay, well, my phone's going to die. I forgot. Oops. forgot I forgot I was live and let my phone die. Okay. Yeah. It's cold out there. My imagination is such that I forgot that I wasn't in a lecture hall and that I was on my phone. Whoops. The point I was going to make is no longer easy to make because I'm in a Panera, and so now it's just obviously true. But the rich, the ruling class, don't exist in post-democratic Republican world that we exist in. But what do exist are rich people who are trying their very best to elevate the maximal number of human beings, fully aware that not everybody is qualified to be elevated.